found this lovely little location that I've seen while driving around, and I thought it's very odd because it's a church that's sort of standing on its own, without a village around it. There are a couple of farmhouses here, but it's a large church for two farmhouses. And so it caught my eye on the map the other day, and I zoomed in and had a look at it, and it said it's the finest medieval church in the whole of Europe. So I thought, well, I have to come and have a look. And the more I did a little bit of exploring about this place, the more interesting it got. It is in the village of Steetley. And the village of Steetley is quite unusual because it's a village that no longer exists. It is one of the lost villages, which means that around about the year 1349, the Great Plague came and it killed everybody in the village, and the village died. But what was left was this fine medieval church. Now, they wonder, it's often been passed down orally, that the church is in fact an Anglo-Saxon church. There's a possibility that it's Anglo-Saxon due to it being, it has a slot behind the door that you would put an invasion beam into, which would date the church a little bit older than early Norman. However, it is recorded as early Norman. It's 1120. It's a very cute little church. It's a very lovely, quiet spot here. And the reason it's remained untouched was because it fell derelict after the plague, and it stood without a roof for hundreds of years until 1880s or so, when it was finally rebuilt and a roof was put back on it to save the architecture. So it is an untouched medieval church, whereas most churches have been built on in several phases, you know, and they got bigger and bigger. This is a lovely cute little church. So this is quite a sacred spot, sacred little spot. It's a village that no longer exists. It's untouched by time. Apparently they ploughed these adjacent fields over here for the first time in living memory in 1967, I think. And they found the abandoned village, all the post holes of the abandoned medieval village here. So that's where the village was, and this is where the church is. Now, with it being an Anglo-Saxon site, it's not really, well, possibly, it's got a lot of heathen associations. Obviously the name Steetley has the ending of "lee", which would indicate a sacred grove. Steet apparently comes from a root word that means stumps in a clearing. So the name Steetley actually means stump sacred grove. Look at this lovely little farm here. I love about these areas. What I love about this area is these absolutely gorgeous old farms. Many areas of Britain still have names that were used by the Norse and the Saxons, and they denote a previous significance as places of heathen worship. These places can be roughly divided into two categories: gods and shrines. They can show us where former shrines were, and which gods were worshipped. It is known that some churches took over these sites where these pagan shrines were. Gods can be found in idols, or weirs, or wiha, as they were called. A herg or a horga was the site of an altar, often a sacred place such as a pile of stones, a temple, a hilltop or a grove. Another name for a sacred site was an eel or an aal, which meant shrine. So this place stood derelict for 500 years. But during that time it still had some relevance in history, because during the English Civil War a battle actually took place here between the Cavaliers and the Roundheads, and on the walls you can still see the holes made by the musket bullets, and they look quite large and quite hefty, to be honest. So it's had quite a history to this place. And of course then somebody came along in 1880, I think it was, and repaired the roof and saved it for posterity. And now, after 500 years yet again, it is used as a church. So we have names like Harrow, which are derived from Herg, like Harrowden in Northamptonshire, which came from Hjergadun, or hill with heathen shrine. Weir is a shrine with an idol, often found on hilltops or in forest clearings. So Weir way is often found with a suffix dun or lee. It can often be transformed to wig or y. Places like Wiley in Surrey or Wheeley in Essex, which means a shrine in the woodland grove. Wheeley Down or Weghill in Surrey and Weedon in Buckinghamshire mean idols on the hill. Names that end with lee or ley mean clearing in a wood, but held importance also as sacred groves. In Old Norse these were called Lundr, often surviving as the English word lound. Lund, Lound and Lun are also lee names, like Hoflun in Westmorland, and combines with a rare Scandinavian heathen shrine name, Hof, which is similar in meaning to hag. Ale, All, is a temple and can be found in place names like Alcombe in Kent, whose 12th century name was Elam, Ham meaning homestead. A burial mound or tumulus was considered a sacred site, and this can be found in place names of Saxon origin, named Bjorg or Berg in Anglian, or Chlau or Chlaw, which in Old Norse was Haugr, sometimes also denoted as a natural hill, although often one thought to be inhabited by elves. Bjorg is more common in the south and Haugr in the north of England. Bjorg is a slightly more difficult word to identify, as it is often confused with Berg or Burra, a fortress town, or even with Beru, which means grove. Also, the Old Norse for a hill was a berg. So suffix names like Barrow or Barrow are clear, whereas others are not. Longborough and Lamborough in Gloucester means long barrow. Brokenborough in Wiltshire means broken barrow. Idle barrow in Berkshire means empty barrow or useless barrow. Stowborough in Somerset means stone barrow. Walborough in Devon means wolf's hill. It is often shortened to Bury, such as Simonbury in Dorset or Sigemund's Mound. Clow or Hlaw are often confused with lay or lee, and it is often given as low or law, a name very common in Derbyshire, such as Arborough, and belongs to one of 70 low place names in this area. Derbyshire is full of lows, 30 of which are definitely barrow mounds. Kenneth Cameron believes that at least 1 in 6 of these place names commemorate an actual person who is buried there, such as Taplow in Bucks. Taplow was excavated and probably belonged to one Taper at 1086, who was of Mercian royalty. Bledlow in Bucks means Bladers Mound, Thriplow, Trippers Mound. It can also be compounded with trees that grow there, and other aspects like Wardlow in Derbyshire, which means Lookout Hill, or Drakelow, which is a dragon's hill. Hauger is often spelled How. It is Norse and Ain. Clitheroe in Lancashire means Song Thrush Mound. Carlinghow in West Yorkshire means Old Woman or Witch Mound. How in Norfolk and Northants and Hoon in Derbyshire simply mean barrow or mound. But what's really interesting is this little lane that runs beside it. I was looking on the map and it's called Scratta Lane. I thought that is a very unusual name. I wonder what that means. And apparently Skratta is a heathen word for a wizard. And this is one of the few surviving place names that records a topographical, magical wizard or demon. And this runs to Skratta Wood, which is just up here. And that means Little Demon's Wood in Old Norse or Old Anglo Saxon. So let's go up the lane and have a look at the Demon's Wood. Apparently, even now in the north of England, they called the devil Oud Scrat. And this comes from this word, Skratta. It's something to do with a seder worker, a male seder worker, and a galder worker. So this would seem to have heathen Anglo-Saxon or Old Norse Danelaw connotations. So I thought it was a wonderful little place and a great introduction to talking about heathen sacred spots that are still recorded in place names. Okay, so I'm going to take a little bit of a drive now up Scratta Lane to Skratta Wood, or up Demon Lane to Demon Wood. Let's have a look up here. There's not a lot up here. One farmhouse. It's an abandoned bit of land, but it still retains the name from the Old Norse. Lundr, which is a rarer form, is a Scandinavian word and means sacred grove. It is more often found in Sweden and often confused with land through pronunciation. It can often be an area where a wapentake, literally a weapon take, were held, or a thing, an assembly, such as Birkelands in Nottinghamshire, the Bassetlaw wapentake. These sites were considered as sacred groves. Timberland in Lincolnshire is a grove where timber was taken. Kirkland in Lancashire was a church grove, and Owlands in North Yorkshire was a wolf's grove. So this is it. This is Scratta wood, old demon wood, little devil, and it's named after a local little demon that lived here. So let's go explore. It's not very big. Quite a nice little bit of woodland. Must be very old, a bit of woodland. I suspect it was bigger, but there's not a lot left. So as you can see, it's only a few hundred yards of wood and only 20-30 metres wide. Just a little strip. I must have thought it was quite magical if they were naming it. Apparently after a demon that lived here. That was quite common in Norse place names. They quite often called places after water spirits, called Nika, or hagtesses, which were witches. Some were named after dwarves, some were named after dragons, and I think they thought that these inhabited certain areas. So here they must have thought that a little demon inhabited the woodland. Doesn't seem like a demon lives here, it's very peaceful. That's it, I've run out of path. It's quite jungle, a bit of wild woodland here. I wonder where these fields are now, whether this used to be, more wood. We have flowers. What have we got here? Oh, look at that. Some primroses. How beautiful, eh? Isn't that cute? Just a bunch of primroses. There you go. So apart from place names named for heathen gods like Woden, Thor, or Thur, Tyr and Frigg, they were also called after supernatural creatures that they thought inhabited the area. Skinne meant ghost or spectre in Old English. So Shincliffe in County Durham meant cliff haunted by a spectre. Skinburness in Cumbria meant headland by a stronghold haunted by a ghost. The Anglo-Saxons called a ghost a grima, and this name appears in Grimley in Worcestershire, which was the glade where a spectre appeared. Grimeshaws in West Yorkshire meant Goblin Mound or Grimshow. Other names are Showbrook in Devon, Shuckton in Derbyshire, Shuckburgh in Warwickshire and Shucknall in Herefordshire. A pucker or goblin appears among others in Puckeridge in Hertfordshire, Purbrook in Hamptonshire. Puckshipton in Wiltshire is a cowshed haunted by a puck, whereas Puckle Church in Gloucestershire is a church haunted by a puck or goblin. There's also Poppets Drove, Poppets Hill and Pugney. Elves were also said to haunt a place. So we have Elvedon in Suffolk and Alvedon in Lancashire, as well as Elverhill and Elverhall in Cumbria. Dwerg or dwarves can be found at Dwarridon in West Yorkshire and Dwerry House in Lancashire. Giants, called thurs, are often combined with a ravine or a fen. This is how we know which is a giant and which is a site to the god Thor. So Thursford in Norfolk is also a giant's ford. Tusmore in Oxfordshire is a lake haunted by a giant, derived from Thursmere. Thirst House is a cave in Derbyshire, while Thrust Pits in Nottinghamshire and Thirlspot in Cumbria mean giant's deep hole. At Troller's Gill in West Yorkshire, the name comes from the Old Norse troll, combined with the Old English ears, which meant arse, and the Old Norse gill, which meant ravine, and originally meant the troll's arse. The Old English word for a witch, hagtessa, appears in Hascombe in Surrey and Hescombe in Somerset, both of which mean the witch's valley. A word that meant the devil, coming from the word for an evil magician, is Scratti, and this can be found in the place names of Scarthing Moor and Skratta in Norfolk, Scrattawood in Nottinghamshire, Scrathow in Northamptonshire, and Scrathhouse in Allerton, North Yorkshire. There's also a place called Scrattas in East Yorkshire. I'd like to call it the Wizard's Wood. Dragons were supernatural figures in the landscape too, and found among many places such as Drakelow in Bedfordshire, Derbyshire and Worcestershire, and these meant Dragon Mound. There are also Drake Hill, Drake Dales, Drake Holes. Drakenedge Farm in Wiltshire comes from the name for a dragon's egg. Warminster in Somerset is the Hill of the Worm, and Hurdlow, Hordley and Goldsworth may have indicated mounds where the dragon's treasure was to be found. Nicker or water spirits were also thought to inhabit places, and can be found in Nicker Wood in Upper Strafford in West Yorkshire. This is very much an off-road kind of woodland. Small but wild. That's it, I think I have come to the end of Scratta Wood. There's just one row of trees now. Must have been an old wood once, but there's not a lot of it left now. I think it's been encroached on by these fields. That's an interesting place to explore, and one with a lot of history. You see, people look on these little bits of woodland as just a bit of waste ground on the edge of a field, but obviously this wood has been here since perhaps Saxon, definitely Norse times. Has a very long history to it, associated with some kind of supernatural being who inhabited the place. I can see why they thought so. It's quite tangled and atmospheric. That's lovely. Okay, so now I'm going to attempt to get back, but I'm going to walk along the field because it is quite a hard slog through this wood. Beautiful. Glad I came. So, before the advent of Christianity, in the heathen mind, many places had a character. They were places that were sacred, like a clearing in a wood or a hilltop. They gave them names. They associated them with supernatural creatures. It's a shame in some way that we don't see our own land like this. We rip out the hedgerows, we cut back the trees, we add fertiliser to the soil and see it only as a commercial asset. Whereas in the past, it was seen as a character, it was seen as personality, it was seen as a sacred place, one to gather in, one to worship in. So, we're surrounded by the memory of these wonderful ancient sites, and perhaps if we're lucky enough, we will live in a place that has a memory of that name, a memory of that history. I'm lucky enough to live in a place that's called Lee. It's the most common name in England, and it means sacred grove. And I'm happy knowing that the place that I live in was possibly once a sacred clearing, a sacred grove in the woodland.